This guy's name is Hassan. After browsing the news, he accidentally discovered that a huge auction was about to take place at the Louvre Museum. He immediately noticed a diamond necklace worth tens of millions of euros. From that moment, the unemployed wanderer suddenly found his purpose in life again, so he immediately applied for a job as a janitor at the Louvre Museum to investigate the situation. On his way back, he was unexpectedly stopped by a group of debt collectors who took him into a room to question him about the money he had borrowed earlier. They said that if he didn't pay in full today, they would deal with him. Hassan, frightened, said he would pay that afternoon, but this was just an excuse. He didn't have the money to pay. To smooth things over, he proposed a huge deal to steal the necklace that was about to be auctioned. At first, the group hesitated, but seeing the large sum of money, they agreed. And so Hassan went from debtor to boss of his creditors. He showed them a map of the museum to get a feel for the layout and then assigned tasks to each person in a very professional manner. He even reassured them, saying they could look like beggars inside, but they would definitely leave as millionaires. The group, frightened, said the museum's security system was extremely tight, but seeing Hassan's determined expression, they decided to take a gamble and act together. First, the three of them would steal the security guards' uniforms and infiltrate the camera room to subdue the staff. Hassan would have 7 minutes to act. The story then rewinds to the past. At that time, Hassan was just a young boy, wandering with his father in a heavy rain. While they were there, they stopped to help a woman whose car had broken down. Little did they know that she was Pellegrini, the owner of the museum. Her daughter, Juliet, was the organizer of the lavish auction in the present. The auction day arrived quickly. Hassan, disguised as a janitor, helped the three men sneak into the museum. He, disguised as the wealthy Paul, blended in with the rich crowd. He sat in the auction area, while the other three secretly plotted their actions. Initially, everything went smoothly. The three men created a commotion to attract the security guards. Then they quickly used a tranquilizer to subdue the guards in order to steal the costume. However, they bought counterfeit drugs, so the group had to resort to a direct attack. They then approached the surveillance room, but at the critical moment, the spray nozzle malfunctioned. One of them quickly threw a trash can at the guard and shut down the camera system. At this point, the countdown clock showed only 7 minutes left for Hassan to act. Immediately, he stood up and bid 60 million euros, astonishing everyone around him. After that shocking bid, the necklace officially belonged to him. Shortly afterward, Juliet invited him for a private meeting, as she wanted to see for herself who was willing to spend such a large sum of money to buy that necklace. In the trading room, Hassan stood before the necklace. Just a little more reach, and he could have retrieved the treasure from years ago. It turned out that after helping Mrs. Pellegrini all those years ago, he and his father had received her help. His father then became a driver for her family. He and Juliet were just two children who had grown up together. But that same year, his father was arrested by the police on charges of stealing the necklace, even though they had no evidence. Despite his desperate pleas, all suspicion fell on the poor driver. Ultimately, his father was wrongly convicted and ended his life in prison. Hassan was left orphaned and wandered the world. This tragedy not only robbed him of his childhood, but also left him with a deep-seated resentment. From that day on, he vowed to himself that one day he would clear his father's name. Returning to the present, as soon as Hassan touched the necklace, his two teammates immediately rushed in, as planned. One deliberately attacked Hassan, while the other quickly subdued the security guard. Both grabbed their loot and blended into the chaotic crowd to leave. Outside, another person was waiting in a car, ready to leave as soon as everyone was present. The group sped away at high speed. The car was going too fast, losing control, and crashing into a building. The police arrived quickly after the crash, and the entire group was taken to the police station. Ultimately, the precious necklace fell into the hands of the police. It was then that everyone realized it was the lost treasure of the Pellegrini family, where Hassan's father had worked. It was rumored that the necklace had long been separated and scattered throughout the world. So when it reappeared intact, its value immediately skyrocketed. However, all of this was part of Hassan's plan. From proactively applying for a job at the museum, to borrowing money from the thugs, and then seeking out his close friend Benjamin, a master craftsman, to have a fake necklace made. When the three thugs were arrested, the police intended to question Hassan, but the museum security guards vouched for his innocence. In their eyes, Hassan was just another victim like them, so there was no reason to suspect him. That night, a detective named Joseph began to realize that this case had too many similarities to the style of the legendary thief Lupin. After investigating, he discovered that the wealthy businessman Paul was actually Lupin. Hassan was Lupin, the infamous thief who had been a major mystery to the police for years. The next morning, he returned to the museum and resumed his janitor duties as if nothing had happened. It turned out that during the chaos, he had thrown the real necklace into the trash can and let the others take it away. And when everything was over, Hassan's only task was was to go back, find the trash bag, retrieve the treasure worth tens of millions of dollars, and leave the museum with his head held high. However, when he brought the necklace to Benjamin for inspection, he realized that the necklace had never been removed. The story of it being lost all over the world was just a hoax to inflate its price. His father's accusation years ago was also just part of a fabricated story to cover up the dirty scheme of those behind it. Hearing this, Lupin was furious. From that moment, he understood that this was far from over, only just beginning. The next day, Juliet unexpectedly received a letter with a diamond, and the sender was none other than Hassan. He wanted to invite her for coffee. In his letter, he clearly wanted to exchange the necklace. Of course, she had to go alone and absolutely not report it to the police. So Hassan disguised himself as a delivery man again and quietly approached Juliet. He then quickly moved to her seat. The first thing he did was cover the listening device hidden in Juliet's jacket, causing the police who were eavesdropping from afar to suddenly lose their signal. At this point, he went straight to the point. The purpose of today's meeting wasn't to haggle over the item, but to clarify the entire theft from years ago. Under that pressure, Juliet had to admit that Hassan's father had never stolen the necklace. She even confessed that her family had actually bought it from an African businessman. The story of it being stolen was just a staged act to inflate the price. However, the most painful part was that Hassan's father had signed a confession that day. At that moment, the police had secretly positioned officers in ambush around the area. But Hassan, with his instincts, quickly sensed the danger. He immediately grabbed his bicycle and fled. As soon as the authorities saw their target retreat, they immediately split up and pursued him. Everyone thought they had finally locked onto their target. However, Hassan was one step ahead. He hired many delivery people, dressed identically to himself, and had them spread out across the roads to mislead the authorities. As a result, the authorities repeatedly stopped and checked each delivery person. But each time a delivery person removed their mask, a different face was revealed. That evening, when Hassan returned home, he reread the letter his father had left before he died, and was surprised to notice a very strange detail. His father had deliberately misspelled a familiar word. This startled him, because when he was a child, his father had taught him that a man's character lay in always writing correctly. Therefore, this mistake was certainly not accidental, but intentional. Hassan searched the records of prisoners who had served time with his father, and discovered someone whose name matched the misspelled word. He began to suspect this was the key clue to the case. However, he couldn't visit the man directly because he was seriously ill and therefore not suitable for contact. He resorted to another tactic, using the identity of a fellow prisoner who looked very similar to him, pretending to be a cousin to visit. There, he proactively suggested swapping places, allowing the other man to be free while he remained locked in his cell. With such an identical face, deceiving the guards was incredibly easy. While his friend was worried about the handcuffs, Hassan performed a magic trick. In the blink of an eye, the handcuffs miraculously appeared on his wrists. During a break, Hassani approached other prisoners to inquire and learned that the man's name was Komet. This is the man who worked at the prison library while his father was imprisoned. Komet is currently seriously ill in the hospital and may not return. Hassan immediately goes to the hospital, pretending to be in terrible pain, like having a stroke, and asks to stay overnight for observation. However, the doctor says the illness isn't too serious and refuses. The next morning during group activities, Asane encounters the three thugs who used to be his companions. He approaches them to inquire about the source of the goods. They unexpectedly attack him with a ballpoint pen, and Hassan is immediately taken to the hospital for treatment. It seems like bad luck, but it actually goes according to plan. There, he is cared for and treated by a beautiful female doctor. Afterwards, Hassan uses his remaining strength to find his father's former prison friend. By then, Kumet is very ill and looks like he's on the verge of death. But as soon as he heard Hassan say he was his friend's son, he managed to compose himself. Kumet said that years ago, Hassan's father had left behind a book with very careful instructions that someone would come to retrieve it later, and because of that message, he had kept it safe for all these years. The next morning, Hassan continued his usual work of distributing blankets and mattresses. As soon as he arrived at Kumet's room, Hassan quickly searched for the book. That evening, he sat down and reread each page, and it was the same storybook his father had given him as a child. Among the pages, faded with age, were countless carefully marked symbols, accompanied by a message. When he pieced them all together, he finally read the words, "I am innocent," framed by the name Pellegrini. Only then did Asani understand that his father had actually fallen into the trap set by the Pellegrini family. The following day, the prison's daily routine continued as usual. At lunchtime, the prisoners lined up one by one to receive their meals. However, Asani was spat on by the man. After eating, he went to the hospital to check his wounds, and then made time to see Kumet one last time. Kumet was so weak that even speaking a few words required effort, but he still managed to ask Asane one last thing to make his wife smile again, no matter what. Hearing this, Asane silently nodded in agreement. With the discreet help of a nurse, he began to implement his escape plan by faking his death. It sounded insane, but in this situation, it was the quickest way out. So, during a break, he grabbed a basketball hoop net and wrapped it around his neck to create elasticity and reduce the pressure of hanging. Then he swallowed several special pills to induce a state of temporary sudden death. However, that very night, one of the thugs showed up intending to kill him to cover his tracks. Luckily, Asan was one step ahead. He had already hanged himself, and at that moment the alarm sounded, causing chaos throughout the detention center. Seeing this, the other man returned to report to his boss that Asan had ended his own life in his cell. After examination, the police determined that the victim was beyond saving. They proceeded to remove the body according to procedure, unaware they were being deceived. Just as the vehicle stopped at a red light, Asan slowly crawled out. In just a few seconds, he vanished into the night as if he had never existed. The next place Asan went was Pellegrini's old house. He wanted to know what the family had done to his father over the years to drive a kind, single father to such a desperate act in prison. It was his mother who revealed the truth. They had forced his father to sign a confession. They had used sweet words to deceive his father, telling him that if he signed the paper, everything would be resolved. But the final outcome was a cruel trap for a father clinging to his last glimmer of hope. However, the person who directly forced Asan's father to sign the confession wasn't his mother, but an inspector named Dumon. Dumon exploited Asani's father's trust, turning him into a sacrificial lamb for his plan. After Asan obtained Dumon's information, he immediately left his old house and delivered a diamond to a woman, Kumet's wife. From here, Asan's next objective was Dumon. Dumon had directly forced Asan's father to sign the confession. He appeared as a busy man, outwardly portraying himself as a loving husband and father, but that seemingly kind exterior couldn't hide his hypocrisy. By some miraculous means, Asan had tracked every corner of Dumon's apartment, learning his daily routine and even his smallest habits. Taking advantage of Dumon's scheduled maintenance at the office, Asan disguised himself as an IT employee and used the excuse of repairing a computer to approach his target. That morning, Dumon was in a meeting with high-ranking officials. However, just as the atmosphere was becoming serious, a young man entered and reported that Dumon's computer contained pornography. Seeing this, Dumon quickly pulled Asan aside and hastily explained that he had never seen such things before. He asked Asan to delete it. Asan said he had no obligation and moreover could not access Dumon's computer without a reason. At that moment, a woman in the office announced that Michael was off that day, so Asan would temporarily fill in. Hearing this, Dumon began to have doubts. He then pulled Asan into his private office to talk. Unexpectedly, as soon as they entered, Asan unleashed a pressure point technique that knocked Dumon unconscious on the spot. Then, he quickly took the phone from Dumon's pocket, broke the SIM card to cut off communication. Next, he stuffed Dumon into a suitcase and dragged him out as if he were transporting normal luggage. Afterward, Dumon was escorted to an abandoned house. When he regained consciousness, he realized he was tied to a chair with a surveillance camera and a time bomb in front of him. Above, Asan had used voice-changing software to conceal his identity and simultaneously recorded the entire interrogation process. He projected an image of his father onto the screen and asked Dumon if he remembered anything about this person. Why would Dumon be so heartless as to harm a poor, innocent driver? At first, Dumon refused to confess, but Asan had investigated thoroughly. Asan pointed out the numbers and clearly stated that his inspector's salary wasn't enough to send his daughter to a prestigious school. Dumon remained stubborn, so Asan resorted to further psychological tactics by showing him pictures of his wife and children. The purpose wasn't to act recklessly, but to expose the facade of the exemplary husband that the old man had been trying to maintain for so long. Asan called Dumon's wife. Seeing this, Dumon finally confessed, but then he asked Asan for a sip of water. So Asan turned off all the lights and opened the door to the room where Dumon was being held. He simply placed the water bottle next to the chair and quietly left. When the lights came back on, Dumon saw the water bottle right beside him. Returning to the room, Asan was surprised to see a call from his ex-wife, Claire. He quickly answered, and the voice on the other end mentioned that their son's birthday was coming up, but he'd been so busy lately that he'd practically disappeared from their lives. Hearing this, he could only say that he remembered and would definitely prepare something special for the boy. But Claire continued to ask why he'd been so busy lately. He then made up an excuse that he was reorganizing some old files, which was why he was so busy. But even after hearing this, she still didn't believe him and whispered that she knew what he was up to, so he shouldn't put himself in danger. It turned out that Claire was the woman who had been close to Asan since their school days. Back then, she was a beautiful girl being bullied by a group of boys, and he was the the one who came to her rescue, even though he almost got beaten up himself. Luckily, the teacher came in just in time and called everyone back to their seats. So from that moment, the two had the chance to sit next to each other and get to know each other. Back to the interrogation, Dumont finally confessed that he had accepted bribes in a few cases, but he still tried to maintain that the money was only to provide for his children and ensure his family had a comfortable life. Meanwhile, the police confirmed that Inspector Dumont had been kidnapped. After reviewing the security camera footage from their office, they clearly saw Hassan dragging a large suitcase and pulling it into a car. From that detail, the police immediately traced the license plate to track the suspect's movements. However, the other cars circled around as if trying to stall for time, then suddenly disappeared from sight. Dumont's phone had also lost contact. Just when all leads seemed dead, the inspector discovered the phone could be tracked via GPS. Fortunately, the tracking system was still working, so the police immediately used technology to trace the phone's last signal. Meanwhile, Hassan was torturing Dumont with an even more brutal move. He used deepfake software to superimpose Dumont's face onto a video in which he confessed to corruption. Dumont cried upon seeing this. Hassan, losing his patience, blurted out why Dumont had blamed his father. Upon hearing this, Dumont immediately recognized him as the son of the driver from years ago. Hassan, too shocked by the revelation of his identity, could only remain silent. Dumont began pleading for forgiveness, promising that if Hassan let him go, he would absolutely not pursue the matter further. Meanwhile, the police's tracking system finally located Dumont's phone signal. The entire group immediately rushed to the coordinates shown on the GPS. Upon arrival, they saw a man standing next to a suitcase and immediately rushed in to inspect it. However, when they opened the suitcase, the team was fooled again. It was just a clown, as Hassan had joked with them. From the driver's testimony, the police learned that he had only received $200 from a stranger to drive around aimlessly to mislead them. He also confessed that he intentionally parked there to wait for the man to return and pay the remaining amount. Detective Youssef, a huge fan of the Lupin series, began to feel that something was very familiar. Following the typical pattern in the novel, the culprit usually doesn't flee far, but hides right where they started. The most dangerous place is sometimes the safest. Meanwhile, Hassan, after everything, decided to trust Dumont and temporarily spare him a chance. Perhaps sometimes fear is what torments people the longest. Seeing that time was running out, he quickly gathered his tools and left the scene. But as soon as he stepped out, he encountered the police. However, no one recognized the person standing before them as the mastermind behind everything. The police, meanwhile, frantically rushed upstairs and found Dumont. They quickly untied him, defused the bomb, and escorted him out. Back at the office, Detective Youssef stared at the image extracted from the security camera and suddenly noticed something about the culprit that bore a striking resemblance to the man who had been bidding on the necklace at the exhibition 3 days earlier. Based on that intuition, he decided to combine the two cases into one. After returning home, Dumont began to go mad. He ransacked every nook and cranny, smashing everything in his path just to destroy the hidden cameras that Hassan had planted. Clearly, Hassan's psychological game had haunted Dumont to the point that he couldn't eat or sleep properly, as if someone was constantly watching him from the shadows. After dismantling and destroying almost everything that bothered him, he finally went to the bathroom. But even after showering, he didn't calm down and immediately called a mysterious man to discuss matters related to Hassan's father. The person on the other end agreed to meet and hung up. At that very moment, Dumont's wife rushed upstairs, panicked because she noticed something unusual. It turned out that years ago, Mr. Pellegrini had proactively approached Dumont to ask for his help in staging a scene to force Hassan's father to sign a confession for stealing the necklace. In return, Dumont would be recognized for successfully solving a major case, gaining both fame and a promising career path. Hassan's father, however, would be pushed into a scapegoat, and even more cruelly, if he returned the necklace, he would face the highest possible sentence. This meant that from the beginning, he had been trapped in a game with no way out. For all these years, these two men kept this secret to such an extent that even his wife was completely unaware. Returning to the present, Hassan was operating the automatic music player installed in Dumont's house. He played Dumont's confession from when he was captured. The usually arrogant and noble Dumont immediately went berserk. He rushed forward and smashed the music player that he and his wife had once cherished. That night, Hassan continued his spree using a drone to break into Pellegrini's house, aiming to gather more evidence from Pellegrini's office. The drone flew in and zoomed in on all the papers on the desk. However, the room was surrounded by infrared sensors. The drone skillfully approached the desk, grabbing a stack of papers. Just when it seemed like everything was going smoothly, a careless collision with an infrared beam triggered the alarm. Immediately, security forces rushed in, escorting Pellegrini out and destroying the drone, ruining Hassan's plan. The next morning, Duman sat with Hassan for coffee, his face contorted with anger. Hassan's casual remarks about Pellegrini's wife were enough to send shivers down Duman's spine. He warned Hassan that he absolutely must not touch his wife. Then, Hassan explained that his purpose in coming was to discuss how to bring down Pellegrini. However, Duman hesitated to directly help, still feeling apprehensive. After some consideration, he agreed to reveal a crucial clue. According to Duman, the only way to truly bring down Pellegrini was to find a female journalist. She was a fiercely determined journalist, capable enough to accompany Hassan. Seeing Hassan leave, Duman quickly pulled out his phone and called his wife to make sure she was safe. Duman returned to the office and, with his subordinates, reconstructed Hassan's portrait. However, he seemed uninterested, and the facial recognition software this time produced 4 different faces. It turned out Duman's disguise was so masterful that even the system couldn't compete. At this point, Hassani immediately went online to find information about the female journalist. He quickly contacted her and recounted the entire story of how his father had been harmed by Pellegrini. Initially, she hesitated and wanted to refuse, as Pellegrini was a man with connections everywhere and was no ordinary person. But after hearing the story, she couldn't pretend otherwise. Her sense of justice surged, and she decided to help Hassan. When she started piecing things together, she revealed that the same year her father was falsely accused of stealing the necklace, Pellegrini's company also went bankrupt. This uncanny coincidence led them to realize the possibility that the old man might have framed Hassan's father to collect insurance money and then use that money to save his empire. The journalist also revealed that back when she was retired, she had secretly kept an extremely important document, and that evidence was enough to bring him down. That very night, they rushed to the newspaper where she used to work in her youth. She then called the editorial office and, using the name of a famous journalist, spread the word that someone was about to deliver a hot news item. However, because the information was so sensitive, the person holding it didn't dare show their face. Following the script, Asane immediately acted as if he had some incredibly valuable news, causing a stir online. Seeing this, the editorial office, fearing they would miss the opportunity, quickly chased after him, dragged him back, and took him straight to the office. Taking advantage of this, Hassan seized the opportunity to retrieve the documents he needed and escaped. Back home, the two sat down together to review the video and the documents they had obtained. It turns out that many years ago, a terrorist attack occurred at the French embassy. According to what has been revealed, it was a bloody revenge attack by Malaysian arms dealers against a notorious con artist. The horrific explosion killed 11 people, and the target of that attack was none other than Pellegrini. This video is evidence of a conversation between him and the terrorists from that time. It was enough to strip away his facade of respectability and turn it into a joke in an instant. Hassan immediately uploaded it to YouTube, along with an ultimatum. In it, he accused Pellegrini of indirectly causing the tragic terrorist attack that claimed the lives of so many innocent people. By the time Pellegrini discovered the truth and frantically demanded his daughter take the video down, it was too late. The post had already been shared at lightning speed, and the press immediately swarmed his house. Hassan, however, maintained his composure, replying that it was all just fabricated rumors intended to tarnish his reputation. But at that moment, the reporter unexpectedly brought up the terrorist attack from years ago. Clearly, this move was completely outside of Hassan's original plan and immediately heightened the tension. Shortly afterward, a man began following her relentlessly. Realizing she was being followed, she quickly tried to shake him off and ran straight home. When she reunited with Hassan, she didn't forget to boast about her shocking achievement. Meanwhile, Detective Youssef finally completed a portrait of Hassan and showed it to Duman, but Hassan claimed to know nothing, even telling Youssef not to get involved. However, with his professional intuition, Youssef sensed something suspicious in Duman's gaze when he looked at the final photograph. Immediately, the entire force began searching for Hassan. Hassan's next plan was to force the anonymous account to reveal itself and publicly denounce all of Pellegrini's crimes on television. He continued his disguise and sneaked into the office to talk. Thanks to his existing connections in the media, the female journalist arranged several exclusive interviews for him at the station. Just when it seemed everything was about to end, the host changed his mind. They declared that all the accusations against Pellegrini were baseless. The program immediately stopped filming. It turned out that the station had been bribed by the old man beforehand, which is why they changed their minds so quickly. Hassan hurried out and and removed his disguise. Juliet also called her father and suspected that Hassan was behind it all. Only then did Pellegrini realize he was being targeted for revenge. So, the only solution left in his mind at that moment was to eradicate the problem completely. That very night, the old man sent an assassin to find the female journalist and force her to reveal Hassan's hiding place. However, she refused to say anything. Shortly after Hassan arrived, he witnessed a heartbreaking scene. His only companion on his quest to uncover the truth had perished. His heart ached for the honorable woman. Meanwhile, Pellegrini refused to let go. He ordered the assassin to do everything possible to eliminate the person who wanted to bring him down. That morning, Hassan visited Claire's house to pick up their son for his birthday. An assassin was scouring the streets, searching for Hassan. He followed them stealthily, but Hassan, with his years of survival experience, quickly spotted him. A chase ensued. Hassan constantly changed direction and climbed onto the roof to find a hiding place. Thanks to his quick thinking, he finally succeeded in distracting and leaving the assassin behind. However, this incident caused Hassan to be later than planned. Claire was extremely angry because in her eyes, Hassan's missed appointments were nothing new. That's why Hassan always longed to regain their love and trust, so that at least in their eyes, he wouldn't always be just a man who only talked the talk. Since his son was little, he had introduced him to stories about Lupin. Therefore, as he grew up, the boy became as fascinated with the character as his father. However, compared to the Lupin costume Hassan prepared as a gift, the boy preferred books because the costume looked a bit childish. Now the boy is older and has started to develop his own style. To mend and make up for lost family affection, he planned a trip to the beach with his ex-wife and son for a change of scenery. He and Claire had been divorced for a long time. Moreover, she is also in the process of getting to know another man. But Hassan still tried his best to fulfill his responsibilities, hoping that one day she would change her mind. So the three of them boarded the train and began their trip. Throughout the journey, the atmosphere was cheerful as everyone tried to enjoy the rare feeling of being together as a real family. As soon as they boarded, they took out their phones to take some commemorative photos. But just as Hassan was reviewing the photos, he suddenly noticed the figure of someone secretly watching him in the frame. At that very moment, the assassin received a call from old Pellegrini, ordering him to eliminate Hassan. Knowing the danger was imminent, Hassan still tried to remain calm, bringing out the birthday cake and singing happy birthday to his son with everyone. Then he pretended to go get some wine, but in reality, it was to distract the assassin from his wife and son before things went too far. As he passed the ticket inspector, he borrowed a screwdriver. The assassin immediately followed Hassan, but when he reached the end of the train, he saw an open compartment and didn't know which way to go. As he peered inside out of curiosity, Hassan lunged out and punched him. Caught off guard, the assassin completely lost his composure. Hassan quickly overpowered him, cornered him in a compartment, and locked the door to buy time. After dealing with him, Hassan returned to his seat with his wife and children. This time, however, he didn't have a bottle of wine, so he lied, saying he'd just had an argument with some man on the train. Claire's reaction was enough to show she was disappointed once again. In her eyes, Hassan was still a man who always brought trouble wherever he went. At that moment, he remembered the day Claire announced her pregnancy. That day, Hassan was so happy he couldn't contain himself and jumped up in the middle of the restaurant to tell everyone he was going to be a father. But in that joyful moment, he inadvertently caught sight of an elderly woman looking at him with a bewildered expression. It turned out she was one of his victims. One fine morning, Hassan, disguised as Lupin, targeted the home of an elderly family. Using a fake police badge, he approached two patrolling officers and convinced them he was tracking a burglary ring lurking around the house. Seeing his trustworthy demeanor, the officers agreed. Lupin then knocked on their door, claiming to be a police officer providing security. Because of his badge and the two officers standing at a distance, the homeowner completely trusted him and handed over all her valuables, from precious jewels to even a royal egg. She trusted him so much that she gave him everything. Meanwhile, the assassin finally escaped the room and confronted Hassan. The assassin even deliberately showed Hassan his gun and brazenly sat down next to his son. Claire was utterly bewildered, not understanding who this strange man was and why he appeared so tense. As soon as the train stopped at the station, Hassan immediately asked his wife and son to leave. Just a few minutes later, the police suddenly swooped in and apprehended the killer. It turned out that Hassan had secretly slipped a diamond from the necklace into the killer's pocket. He then texted the police station, reporting that the man in the cream-colored jacket on the train was a suspect in the theft. Hassan then left the train and went to reunite with his wife and son as if nothing had happened. But they hadn't gone far before they started arguing again about unresolved issues. While they were arguing, their son disappeared. They frantically searched for him. At this point, under pressure from his colleagues, Dumont finally admitted that the killer couldn't be the real culprit. culprit. He had a valid gun permit and an alibi for the time of the necklace theft. That means the diamond must have been secretly slipped into his pocket by someone. Once again, Yusuf gets scolded for his inability to find out who stole the necklace. The film ends here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.